Alright, hello everybody, my name is John Cross. Here you are on the After Movie Diner YouTube channel, and today I'm going to be reviewing Night of the Reaper, which is currently streaming on Shudder. So it's at this point in the video that I originally had the trailer for Night of the Reaper. Sadly, when I uploaded it to YouTube, even though this is a review of Night of the Reaper and a way to promote Night of the Reaper, and I was actually asked to do it or requested if I wanted to do it by Shudder, a subsidiary of AMC, to do this, AMC decided in their infinite wisdom to block my video in about 250 territories. Great. So instead of that, you get me doing this message saying, sorry, if at this moment you really want to see the trailer for Night of the Reaper, please go watch the Night of the Reaper trailer on any of the multiple instances that it appears on YouTube already. But I would actually recommend you watch my review and then just go watch the film, because the film's great. Much like Grease 2. Actually, as a further disclosure, Night of the Reaper is nothing like Grease 2, except that they're both good films. Thank you.
Night of the Reaper, huh? Kinda catchy.
It is directed by Brandon Christensen. It is produced by Matt Mangiarides, which we also have an interview with Matt here on the YouTube channel. My review of Night of the Reaper could also be subtitled, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Nostalgic Movies. And I'll explain what I mean. Of course I love nostalgia, I love physical media, I love old 80s and 70s movies like the next middle-aged Gen X bearded horror nerd on YouTube. So listen, I get it. But there have been a lot of movies and TV shows trading on the 80s, mainly based on the whole Stranger Things phenomena, but it was kind of happening before then. I take them or leave them based on their merits as individual movies. So going into Night of the Reaper, I didn't know anything about it other than the trailer and other than what Matt and I had discussed while we were doing the interview. But obviously with the title invoking stuff like Night of the Creeps, Night of the Demons, those kind of movies that use the Night of Night of the Living Dead in order to kind of free associate in the mind of the horror fan. And obviously with a masked killer and various other things, it's not only evoking the 80s slasher phenomenon, but also the uber meta 90s and early 2000s slasher phenomenon of stuff like Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer. I've also read online, which was sort of interesting to me, that one of the reasons why it might be set in the 80s and why people might be setting more and more films back then is that things like cell phones and tracking devices and AI and all that kind of stuff that we have now, unfortunately, in modern times, make it very difficult to write horror movies and slasher movies without endless scenes of people wandering around somehow without signal or without their battery dying or without some other thing. I get that, yes, writing of mysteries and a detective film or a Scooby-Doo style slasher, which is like a whodunit kind of slasher, anything like that becomes very difficult with even all the modern crime fighting techniques. In a sort of post-CSI, post-Law and Order world, we've all sat there on TV watching a detective show, and when the writers can't think of how the cops figure out how they do it, they have some person on a computer go, oh yeah, I enhanced this image, which is not something you can do, by the way. I enhanced this image by zooming it in and doing magic TV things. Or you have, well, I traced them down by, hacking their computer, or, any number of sort of writers' tricks where writers try and just, oh, we got to get to the chase. All this writing device we're so used to that sort of setting stuff back in the 80s kind of helps with a lot of that. And I understand that. As I said, I read on the review, I think they did it back in the 80s so that they could kind of shortcut some of the problems that you have trying to write a mystery in 2025. What's interesting about that take from a reviewer is that in the movie, they use house phones and they use a walkie-talkie device. And so I sort of think to myself, it's not necessarily always just about the difficulty of writing a mystery in modern times, although I'm sure that's part of it. I also think that there's something just tactile and interesting and more filmic analog stuff is just more filmic. And yes, it's more cool, and yes, there's nostalgia built into it, and yes, there is a pervading trend right now, and has been for the last few years, and will continue, no doubt, of not only physical media, but a lot of kind of retro and analog stuff being prized right now, because we're seeing so much of our digital life that for the last 10 or 15 years we've kind of taken for granted, now either being sold off, stripped down, removed, whatever it is, or just made less good by the big corporations out there. So it being set in the 80s, ultimately, as I said, I will take or leave movies based on the stories they're telling. And this is where we get to the good part, because the story that Night of the Reaper is telling is fantastic and interesting and different, and throws a ton of twists at you. The first half of the movie is a really, really strong Scream style slasher, and that's what's interesting about it, is it's not, you can't really point to an actual 80s slasher that is anything really particularly like this, outside of maybe tangentially something like Video Violence, which was a shot on video film that was sort of an underground title, and not everyone was watching that kind of stuff in the 80s. But you know, when you think of things like My Bloody Valentine and Prom Night and Halloween and Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and Curtains and fucking Happy Birthday to Me, and all these sort of movies that were sort of from the golden age of slasher films, this doesn't really feel like any of those in its plot setup. Anyway, it certainly at a certain point in the middle of the movie subverts all of it, and it does its own thing. And that's why I'm standing here saying how much I loved the movie, because I really did love the movie. I really did like it, and I really do urge everyone to go and see it. The reason why I'm giving it such a positive review is because it decidedly did its own thing. And even though it's using all of the tropes that a lot of filmmakers are using right now, as I said, what it does so well is it actually tells its own story. And that's why I give it huge, high marks. I started to think about it, and I started to go, well, what would a modern, like, let's say they didn't set it in the 80s. Let's say they set it in modern times. How would that go? And I started thinking about it, and I had an interesting discussion with Matt Mangiaridis, the producer, in our interview about the nature of VHS as a format. Because in the movie, the killer is leaving VHS tapes for the police of some of the murders. The idea of sort of that unmarked or handwritten VHS, there isn't another physical format like it. If you were going to do a modern day equivalent, it would be thumb drives or some fucking thing, and you know, they just put it into a computer, and some fucking hacker with glasses would be like, blah 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 blah, oh, this looks like this was digitized at this computer at this IP address and blah blah, and you just fall asleep because it would be so fucking tedious and awful. There was something dangerous about VHS. You could find unmarked VHSs like lying around the woods, or by railway sidings, or in big dusty boxes under your stepfather's bed, or whatever it was. Like you found VHS places. People traded VHS. You could put tape over the tag on the back of a VHS and tape over a VHS. You could do all sorts of things with it. It was an analog format, and there was a danger when you were handed like a bootleg VHS, especially coming from the UK, when during the Video Nasties era and beyond the Video Nasties era, because there were movies that were banned well into my teens, or certainly edited heavily well into my teens, that you would end up getting unedited versions of the films, very often passed around on bootleg or just sort of handwritten labeled VHS. And so when you put it in, you know, sometimes it didn't even have the warnings and the logos and all that. Sometimes it just was the movie. And that was even weirder, because you were like, where did this come from and who made this? To my way of thinking, a story about a killer who's leaving the recordings of their kills for the cops or for the family of the victims in one case to find and watch in a kind of horrific way. VHS works for that, like as a story device. Strip away all the nostalgia. Imagine anything else. Handing over a DVD-R, it's not the same thing. Handing over a thumb drive, it's not the same thing. Handing over a laptop and people being like, oh, we uploaded the murders to the internet. fuck off, I'm so bored. Having a VHS and having, like there's something to that. That was really effective. They took all the nostalgia because they knew that that's kind of a package that's still working right now for a lot of horror viewers and a lot of people craving more of those kind of 80s and 90s feeling horror films. But to then use it to your advantage and make it part of your story and so on, I give this film high marks for that. And because they don't really, outside of maybe one little music beat that happens right at the beginning of the movie with a sort of pre-credit sequence, apart from that, the rest of the movie doesn't go, hey, it's the 80s, by the way. It really doesn't. So all of that assuaged any of my fears around this just being another kind of, hey guys, the 80s, right? The 80s were cool, normally made by people who were either for in the 80s or weren't ever in the 80s. The setting felt appropriate. It didn't feel forced. It's filmed fantastically well. The cinematography is great. It does not, thank goodness, rely on shaky cam or shots you've seen before, like panning through a forest, low, down low. It doesn't rely on milking previous movies and what they did originally to now be done to death. It was so wonderful to see a movie that's just shot on sticks, on tripods, and uses dollies and things like that. That felt really, really refreshing to me. It also made very good use, I'm sure it was shot on digital, but it made very good use of its cinematographer and its lighting and everything else to actually create a filmic look. Again, there are a lot of movies that are shot on video that they then just put into a computer and in either After Effects or on a color grading program or whatever, try and make it look like film. This clearly had someone who knew lighting, who knew cinematography, who knew how to play with shadow. Really, really well done. I just thought very, very effective. It looked great. The acting was routinely fantastic throughout. The script is great. There isn't that thing that I see so often where they overwrite all the characters. Well, because it's the 80s, the jocks have got to be real dicks, right? And the women have got to be really dumb, right? Etc., etc. I really enjoyed the writing. I really enjoyed the acting. I really enjoyed the cinematography. Really loved the direction. Thought the score was fantastic. It didn't rely on too many pointless 80s needle drops. There was the occasional what I call X-Files syndrome where I just sit looking at the character on the TV going, really, you wouldn't turn the fucking light on there? Like there was 2 or 3 scenes where I'm like, you would put the light on. Until at a certain point they had a character try the light switch and the lights weren't on and you're like, oh, okay, great. And then also later on there's a twist that kind of explains why they didn't turn the lights on. So again, it was one of those things that all the kind of fears and criticisms that I might have had are assuaged within the movie. So that was also fantastic. It's clearly very well made. There were genuinely scary bits in it, and I don't get scared very often. Maybe a tad reliance on jump scares and other things like that, but I mean, look, it's a slasher, that's to be expected. There was some great twists. I'm not going to spoil any of the twists, but basically everything you thought you knew in the beginning of the movie, you do not know. That's all I'm going to say. This is another reason why I'm drawn to slashers in general, is because slashers are often disguised detective films or serial killer movies. And I love the detective genre. And so this one having a strong kind of detective subplot that was going on all the way along, absolutely loved that about it as well. So high praise for Night of the Reaper. Screen it now on Shudder. I really hope there's like a nice big stacked Blu-ray. I'm also having just a lot of fun this season watching new horror movies and thinking we're doing well again. I'm not a big fan of elevated horror, and I'm not a big fan of people attempting to make grindhousey, nostalgia-driven films that just don't work because they are playing to the tropes rather than playing to the story. This one I thought hit my sweet spot. Great story, great acting, great cinematography, and someone who understands how to truly build tension and truly build a story. And yeah, I mean, look, there are little things I could pick apart about it, like there is with anything, but life's too short. So thank you, Night of the Reaper, for finally getting rid of the curmudgeonly cynic within me and allowing me to embrace a fantastic slasher film and add another great modern horror to my list of things that I'm starting to love again, and that feels really good. So everyone check it out, and everyone go watch our interview with Matt Mangiarides, the producer of Night of the Reaper.
Night of the Reaper, huh? Kinda catchy.